Good morning or afternoon, everyone, wherever you're watching this, whatever time it is. We are going to review a couple of topics today built around hydration and electrolytes. Now, here in the States, we're like at this tail end of summer where it's still hot, it's not quite fall, where the whole electrolyte thing is still a major factor in how well someone does in performance. And then overseas and Australia, etc., it's starting to get to be spring. Soon summer will be here. This will become really relevant. So it's a very timely topic to cover. So we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to kind of first and foremost define what electrolytes even are. We hear so much about them, especially lately, but nobody, I would venture to guess, really knows why we need them and why everybody's saying they're so important and why people like Andrew Huberman and all these people are pushing these electrolyte supplements. What do they actually do for us and what's the truth on them? We're going to look at what they are. We're going to name them, in other words. Some of them are major and really can have a dramatic impact on you in day-to-day life and especially in performance or training or hiking or hunting or whatever it is that you're involved in. And then, third and foremost, what I really want to leave you with is some practical tips. What are some products you can buy? There's so many options. What should you look for in a product whenever you're going to buy one? And then, really, one of the big pushes lately have been, well, you need this perfect ratio of sodium to potassium to magnesium to chloride and trying to find that. And there's companies like formulating their products based around that. They even put citations from studies in there. And do you need to worry about that? And we're going to look at what really matters. I mean, when you're going to shop these things and you're looking at all of these products, of all the options that you've got, what should you really be paying the closest attention to? So obviously this is a video. You can stop it, you can start it, you can come back and watch it, rewind it, whatever, take some notes, but I hope that you'll get some good information out of this today. So what are electrolytes? You can see the definition written here. They are basically the circuit breakers of our body controlling chemical charges. Now, that's a very nerdy example, and if I hadn't already told you that I'm going to give you some product recommendations at the end of this, you probably would have already tuned out. But basically, electrolytes are important because they allow you to do what you like to do. They control the muscles in your legs to contract the muscle so you can get up the mountain. They control nerve impulses that give you the ability when you think of something subconsciously. When I reach my hand out, they're controlling nerve impulses. They're keeping fluid in your body where it's supposed to be. They keep it inside of your cell versus letting your abdomen fill up with water, or your legs swell, and you get fluid built up in the bottom of your legs. They are, in a nutshell, a vital part of being alive. In fact, I would argue that second to food, second to calories, because without calories you would die, without water you would die, without electrolytes you would be significantly or severely limited on what you could do and you would die. Potassium is one of the main electrolytes that keeps the heart pumping. Too much of it and you're dead. Too little of it and you're dead. And so the body is in a constant fight to keep equilibrium. This is rule number one. You cannot outsmart the body. We have mechanisms built inside of us that if you get too much of one or too little of another, barring some sort of a medical condition, if you've got kidney dysfunction or heart dysfunction, then you would fall into the category of having a medical condition where this isn't true. But barring some of those things, if you eat too much of this or drink too much of that, your body is going to get rid of it to keep a very narrow margin of an electrolyte balance so that you stay alive and so that you continue to function as normal. That is key number one. When you're out there reading all of these products and you're freaking out about sodium in a backpacking meal, or you're worried about potassium, or you're worried about this, you're worried about that, your body, if does not have a medical condition, will fight to keep that margin through peeing, through breathing, through water, through all of these different things. You cannot outsmart it. So that is rule number one that you need to remember going into this. Three major electrolytes: sodium, potassium, chloride. The other thing that you've got to remember, sodium in particular, and again, we're going to take anybody with a medical condition that's got kidney dysfunction, heart dysfunction, something else you've been told by your doctor you need to watch salt, and we're going to put it on the shelf over here for a little bit. Sodium is the main electrolyte lost in sweat. Any fractionally small loss of sodium in you will dramatically reduce your performance. So the name of the game becomes an exchange. You're sweating, you're losing it. You're peeing, you're losing it. You're drinking more water, you're losing it. You've got to eat it. Eat it, drink it, something to bring it in. So all of that to say, do I worry about the salt in backpacking food? No, especially not whenever it's in the summer. It's really hot, and you are what we call a salty sweater. Some people naturally lose more sodium in their sweat than others. If you get done exercising, you get done training, you get done hiking, you get done just being outside working in a garden, and you can see a sweat ring around your shirt or in your ball cap or anywhere, you are a salty sweater. Your need for sodium replacement is even higher than someone who doesn't have that. And so that's something that's key to remember as well. You'll see that I wrote in small letters calcium, magnesium, and others. And that is because they are needed in less amount. They're kind of considered the smaller ones. All of them control, like we talked about earlier, normal body impulses, nerve function, muscle contraction, and all of the things that we talked about up there. So let's dip over into this conversation of, well, okay, what should I be aiming for whenever I go to buy a sodium product? Or, I'm sorry, an electrolyte replacement product. You have a few different options. Number one, all the way on the far right-hand side down here, do not forget that eating sodium or eating food also brings back in electrolytes. So even if you don't buy one of these, fancy, where's all my little examples? One of these fancy electrolyte drinks of some kind does not mean that you're not getting it back in. Okay, so that's number one to remember. When you look at the different categories, you've really got five. We've already covered food for the most part. And I'm looking for my sheet here. There it is. We've already covered food for the most part. So you've really got four others when it comes to this. And I'm going to link a couple of articles that I wrote in here so you can go in, you can look at those articles and read more about this as well, because it really highlights exactly how to follow some of this. The other four categories are you've got powdered mixes with carbs, powdered mixes without carbs, single supplement capsules like a sodium tablet, for example, or even a magnesium supplement or a whatever, like a mega complex is what they now call them. And then you've got specialty listed down there at the bottom. Now, powdered mixes with carbs would be something like this. Liquid IV also falls in this category, but the amount of carbohydrate to electrolyte that they have is less than something like this. So that's something to remember. Now, why would I even include carbohydrates in this conversation? For a couple of reasons. Number one, we talk all of the time about fueling when training, fueling when hiking, fueling when hunting, fueling when doing anything outside. Carbohydrates are the main driver of the muscle. So you can kill two birds with one stone by getting something with carbohydrates in it. When it comes to the logistics of backpacking and with food, food takes up space, it takes up bulk. You can pile in 100 grams of carbohydrate in a small baggie about the size of this Post-it note, whereas 100 grams of carbohydrates with food would be 2 or 3 bagels, right? So you're talking quite a bit from a logistic standpoint. And when you take into consideration the fact that you also now have salt and electrolytes replacing this, I don't see how there's a better option than stuff like this. We're going to go to specialty because Gatorade's obviously not the only suggestion in the game, but that's the cheapest. It's the most effective. It's the most readily available. You can get it at your grocery store. I think I paid maybe $10 for this, and it's got 65 servings in it. Tailwind, by example, is $32 for 32 servings. So it's literally 3 times the cost, 4 times the cost, with half the amount of servings in it. So you can, if you like it, you can buy it, but it doesn't make much sense to me. But we're going to talk about specialty here in a minute because there is a caveat involved with that. Going back to this, why else would I suggest this beyond logistics and beyond carbohydrates being the primary fuel source? If you want to maximize performance, you stay hydrated. A loss of 2%, 2% of your hydration is an automatic decline in performance. Two of the best ways to make sure you stay hydrated, other than the obvious, which is regularly drinking water, have some sodium, have some carbohydrate. Remember that water attaches to salt, water attaches to carbohydrates. So the more that you have coming in, the more water that's going to be attached to that, the more hydrated you stay. So again, everybody wants to run from this stuff, and I'm telling you, it is the sleeper on the market when you're trying to find performance foods. This is basically where it starts and stops. Beyond that, there is no performance foods beyond detailing in your calories and your macros, your carbohydrates, your proteins, and all of that stuff. Category number two, powdered mixes without carbs. Probably if you've ordered any Element or anything like that, you've got a little package like this. This has almost 0 grams of carbs in it and 1,000 milligrams of sodium in it. And this would be another one, like Gatorade Zero, for example. 0 grams of carbs and 160 milligrams, 10 times the sodium than this. So if you are, for one reason or another, trying to reduce your carbohydrate intake, that could be an option for you if you wanted something like that. Now, there's a number of different reasons why someone would be wanting to keep it low carb. But again, I would even argue that people who have carbohydrate processing disorders, if they're active on the trail, will handle carbs better than whenever they're sitting in an office chair, for example. So again, sometimes people want that, but it's not always necessarily needed. Single supplements like a capsule, there's one in particular from Hammer Nutrition are called a salt tab. I think it's salt exclamation point tab or something like that. I think it's from Hammer, but I'll have to double check. Point being this, the amount of sodium in there is what's actually in there. Most sodium capsules are a combination of sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is only 60% sodium, 40% chloride, so you're only getting a fraction of the dose of sodium that you actually need to stay functioning. So if you're going to go the capsule route, make sure that you find one that's got an adequate amount of sodium in it that you can replace it with. And then obviously we talked about food. Let's move down here to the specialty products, right? So we first of all, we talked about Tailwind. I've mentioned that a couple times. Element comes up again, and then Gatorade Endurance. This is why they're specialty. They have a higher dose of sodium than something like this, which is your average Gatorade, right? Now, if you're a salty sweater, if you're planning to do something in the middle of the day, let's say you got a desert ultra coming up or something, if it's late October or July or whatever in the States and it's smoking hot outside, you're losing a lot of salt, you're hiking in somewhere that's really exposed, you're in the Alpine, whatever. You may consider something like this for the greater sodium replacement, but remember, you can always mix and match. You don't have to go with just one, which means you could have an electrolyte drink, you could have some salty pretzels inside of your trail mix, you could have salted nuts with extra salt added. There's a number of different ways. What matters the most is that you're bringing in sodium. So, as a synopsis, right? Because you could get lost in all of this and you're trying to decide, okay, well, what route or what direction should I go? We're going to come back and I'm going to answer that. But remember this, one of the key things is this. Just make sure that you're getting sodium in regularly throughout the day. The hotter it is, the more you sweat and the saltier a sweater you are. Don't worry about the amounts. Don't get wrapped up in a Excel spreadsheet trying to nail a number. You will not even notice the difference between getting that and just trying to make sure you're getting in enough. Remember that. Number two, the last thing that you want to do, what you're really trying to avoid in all of this, if you find yourself in any of those scenarios, smoking hot outside, you're a salty sweater, you're hiking in an area with a ton of exposure and a lot of sun, whatever it is, you want to make sure that if you're losing a lot of sweat, you're not just drinking water. You're bringing in some sodium somewhere because if you're drinking water and you're losing sweat, you're not replacing the salt. You will have a problem in terms of getting too low of a sodium. So that is another thing to remember. Number three, how can I evaluate? Am I getting enough? Are you peeing frequently? Is that pee not dark yellow? If you have stopped peeing and if your pee is really dark yellow, you're behind the eight ball and need to make up by drinking something like this. You want something like this added into water if those are you. Now, if you're on a 1 hour training hike and you're sweating a lot, no, don't drink this stuff. But if you're on a multi-day trek, you're on a through hike, you're trying to summit something, whatever, something where it's a multi-day event, several hours long, you're losing a lot of sweat, lots of exposure, lots of sun, lots of all these different issues, then yes, you want to add something like this. So, which one should you choose? It doesn't matter. You pick the one that you like, right? There's some things in here you would say, well, I'm not going to get that product because they use artificial colors. Some people don't like that. So, Tailwind mixes clear. You may like that idea. Some people may say, Tailwind's too expensive for me. I've got no option but to use this stuff. Good, because this stuff will work. Some people may not even want to use this and may want to mix something like Tang with salt added into the Tang. Great, you win too. Some people will want to use a lower carb one. Great, you win. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that these are all carriers of salt. That's it. All these are doing is carriers of sodium in there for you. You find the one that works for you. And I'm going to leave you with this. There have been a lot of companies and products saying like, well, there's a specialty, formulation of ratio of sodium to potassium and magnesium and all this. There are things floating around out there like that. That is very true. But the key thing to remember is that does not matter. Do not get yourself wound up in a spreadsheet and trying to optimize everything. Make it practical. Get in sodium with regularity. Eat sodium-based foods, especially if you're not a cardiac patient, if you don't have kidney disease, if you sweat a lot, if you're in a lot of exposure, if you're in a lot of heat, all of these things are factors where you would want to do that. So do not get wound up in trying to find the perfect ratio. Some companies will list studies about why, we need more of this, we need more of that, we need these ratios. And when you read the studies still, because I went and looked them up, they still say things like, well, it's still pretty inconclusive. So, and what they were studying was cardiac patients, not hikers. So you've got to remember, always find the practical. Optimal does not always mean better. Find the practical, even if you can't find the optimal. Make sure that you're replacing your sodium losses. Eat it, drink it. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you're going to get some, then if you're on a training hike or something, you don't need a lot of it. But if you are doing things over 2 and 3 hours, if you're doing things that are multiple days long, if you're in a season where you're out every weekend, you're out multiple times during a week, you're out on a week-long hike, a week-long hunt, whatever, you want to find something like this. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to send them to me at info@b2pnutrition.com. I will link both of the articles that we developed for this, and I will link the podcast we developed for this. If you have any questions, please let me know. We'll talk to you soon.